control your chair so I can face the right way. So don't get it.
Here. To this panel discussion for Comm Week. We're down to 2 more sessions. Hopefully you all had a chance to sign up for raffle tickets. If you did not, right after the session, run out and fill out a raffle ticket. We will draw for those during the next session. This panel is a panel to talk about journalism, local journalism, and to talk about an initiative that I got to be a part of called the Wichita Journalism Collaborative. It struck me as I've listened to the various speakers during Comm Week, so many have talked about some words that I probably should have put up here for the session as well. Some of those words were curiosity, courage, and collaboration. Those are the 3 that really stuck out to me because we needed a lot of all of those to do what we tried to do over the last 18 months. So I was really happy to hear other speakers talk about that as well. It doesn't matter whether you want to be in journalism or marketing or advertising. All 3 of those things are things that you will need, as we are a testament to. All right, I wish we had some vanilla ice, but we've talked also about media that made us. And man, that was a pretty big part of my growing up, not growing up, but 5th grade, maybe 4th grade, I'm not sure. Vanilla ice, relevant. Like I said, we're talking about local journalists. What you see up here is a panel of a lot of journalists, all local, who work at some of the organizations that became part of the Wichita Journalism Collaborative. And really, these are the people who are boots on the ground, are out there covering our community. And that's what the Wichita Journalism Collaborative was all about. I cannot stand in front of people and talk about journalism and not just do a quick civics reminder. Some people don't know why we call journalists or journalism as an organization, a broad organization, the 4th estate. So back to your government and civics classes, if you had one, hopefully, you know that there are 3 branches of government, right? Well, the reason that journalism is called the 4th estate, sometimes those branches are called the 3 estates. The 4th estate is what has been assigned as the role of journalism, and that is to watch over these other estates or these other branches. So it's sort of an unofficial but known role of journalism. When you have I have local journalism up here. The truth is this is journalists across the country, across the nation, but we are focusing on local. So when we have strong local journalism, it makes citizens more knowledgeable and engaged with politics and government. It makes elected officials more accountable because they know someone's watching, more responsive and more efficient. And ultimately, because of the first 2, it reduces government corruption, if that's possible. Right? So how do we keep that? If we can agree that those things are important, an important role, then we can also agree that it's really important that we keep local journalists doing their job, right? And how can we make that happen? It's no secret, and this session is not going to be devoted to business models and how journalism is funded, because that could be a whole nother session. But how do we make sure that we are still able to hire people to do that job, right? And so in 2019, I mean, this has been a topic of conversation for longer than this, obviously, but in 2019, the Wichita Community Foundation really started bringing some people together, journalists, local stakeholders, people who felt it was important to make sure we keep local journalists. And they started bringing these people together to have conversations, to ask them to brainstorm, to talk about how can we help strengthen journalism, local journalism. And many of us sitting up here were able to take part in these discussions in various ways, including myself. And really, I got the opportunity to be involved because of a relationship with Courtney Bengston. She is right here, a former Elliott School student. So she was an early student during my time here. And she works at the Wichita Community Foundation. And she and I started having a series of conversations over actually probably a couple years leading up to this. So I was a part of the conversation. Thankfully, it was a lot of fun to brainstorm, and I was passionate about it. One thing for me personally that I was not interested in was starting something new, starting a new outlet. That just wasn't my interest. My interest was, how do we help the people who are already doing a good job and who are already covering our community? How do we help strengthen them, make their jobs easier, make sure we continue to have those people in our community? So February of 2020, if you can think about what you were doing at that time, probably unaware about what was about to happen. We were just getting ready to launch something, the Wichita Journalism Collaborative. And here we were meeting to talk about listening to the community, to talk about narrowing a focus. We decided the first thing we would do is work on sort of a project together, one topic of focus. And we had decided that topic was going to be mental health. And we decided that by going out and talking to a lot of people, talking to citizens, talking to other professionals who work in that field, we talked to people in the police department, and I can't even remember. We talked to a lot of people. And so we collectively decided that was going to be our topic. Then, we drafted a grant proposal right at the tail end of February, first week probably of March, centered around mental health. We were submitting it to Solutions Journalism Network to say, hey, we want to work together on this particular topic. And we'd like to try to take a solutions journalism lens, which means you are not only looking at the problems, but you are looking at what people are out there doing about problems, like who's doing it better. And so ready to submit our grant. In fact, we were probably a week away from submitting that grant, and then enter global pandemic. So I think Madeline McCullough actually wrote this phrase into our description for this panel, and I liked it so much that I stole it from her and put it on this slide. It says, when the going gets tough, the tough get together. I really liked that quote. Like I said, before the pandemic hit, we already had some people committed to jumping into some kind of group project, right? You've heard about that a little bit yesterday too. We laughed because Kevin Hager once said to a group of students, life is a group project. And I think that's pretty relevant, honestly, as much as we may not like to admit that. Excuse me. So we reworked the grant very quickly to give it a COVID focus, to say, right now, really, this is what has to be covered. We can't take time and energy away from covering this pandemic and getting people the information they need. So we went ahead, wrote the grant to start the collaborative. At this point, we asked partners, are you in, are you out? So there were some people who had been in the discussions who decided at this point, we're not interested, we can't do this right now. So we asked partners to commit. And we formed what was called a Memorandum of Understanding, which loosely says, okay, this is how we're going to play together. This is what it means that we're going to share some of our content. This is who still has the rights to the content and those kinds of things. I will tell you that no Memorandum of Understanding can actually cover everything that came up as we were trying to figure this out during the first year. So these were the organizations that committed to being a part of the Wichita Journalism Collaborative. The Community Voice, the journal is a publication through the Kansas Leadership Center, the Wichita Eagle and Kansas.com, the Active Age, which if some of you may not be familiar with the Active Age, because let's face it, you're not 55 or more, but they are a large publication. It's a small staff, very small staff, but they have a large reach of a publication that goes out. It's a nonprofit. But it's mailed out to anyone, I think 55 and older in the area. KMUW, our local public radio station, KSN-TV, and the Sunflower. And then we had 3 community partners join in the efforts as well, A, B, and C Bilingual Services, the Elliott School, and the Wichita Public Library. So that was the players who said, yep, count me in, let's do something, whatever that something is. The very first thing we did, we received the grant from Solutions Journalism Network probably around May, the first week of May. We got the okay, we had access to the grant. One of the first things we did was hire a local freelance photographer to go out and document what does the city look like right now. Most of our partner organizations don't have a plethora of photojournalists. Some don't have any. And we thought that's something they could all use. In addition, it felt like an important thing to have documented, just for historical sake. So we sent, Fernando Salazar went around for a couple weeks, and maybe just a week, and sort of tried to show, what does this look like to be in this pandemic? I know our poor panelists can't really see what's going on up here. You just have to imagine. I really loved this photo, like a good neighbor, stay over there. Nice mask. So I'm going to walk you just quickly through what our goals were, and then briefly like how we try to meet those goals, and then we'll open it up to the panel. The first one was just probably the most important, was to help partner newsrooms coordinate their coverage of COVID-19. So that meant things like sometimes hiring freelancers, like we did with the photographers, to supplement what they were already doing. Their newsrooms were working around the clock, really. And not only that, just like you all, they were forced to go home and work from home. So they weren't in their newsrooms, and they were trying to cover what was one of the biggest stories of the century. So not an easy task. So just what can we do to help make that easier? There were some stories that needed done that maybe not every one of them needed to write. So one partner would write it, share it with the group, and then those efforts didn't have to be duplicated for everyone. So they shared, that really was probably the first thing that started happening pretty easily, was that, they would write stories, do television stories, video stories, and they would say, hey, it's fine, go ahead. If any of you want to publish this, go ahead. So they just shared that, started sharing some of that content openly. Not everything they did. They got to pick and choose. Hire freelancers to fill in the gaps where we could. If there were stories that the partners said, hey, this story needs to be done, we just don't have the resources right now to do it. We had some money from the grant, and we're able to do some of that. Maximize existing resources through collaboration and co-reporting. So this became the hardest thing to do right off the bat because of the pandemic, because of being separated. We never met in person. From the time in fact, not until July of 2021 of this year was the first time we actually met in person since the launch of the collaborative. Everything was done remotely, which was pretty crazy, honestly. This was one of the first stories that was done through the collaborative, and it actually was created by the Sunflower here at Wichita State. Matthew Kelly was the outgoing editor at that time. So he had been involved in the formation of the collaborative. It was a story, the idea came from the collaborative meetings. He wrote the story, shared it, and you can see here it was published by the Wichita Eagle, probably by many of the other partners as well. Wichita's homeless providers navigate congregate living in the age of social distancing. The Active Age, again, that's the publication that is for people 55 and older. They took a really important role of coordinating coverage for the collaborative on what was happening in long-term care centers. Because that, if you remember back, that was some of the hardest hit places early on during the pandemic. So we were able to supplement so that they could hire the freelancers they needed to do that coverage, but it was edited by Joe Stump, who was the editor of the Active Age. We wanted to help partners to fight together for open government and transparency. So a few of the things that we did, we filed an open records request for everything we could find out about how the county was spending the CARES money that they received, and then all the partners could use that information. I don't know if you can remember, but testing was a little wild in the beginning. People didn't quite know where to go or how it worked, or who could be tested and who couldn't be tested. So, and we were having trouble, the partners, actually the journalists were having a little bit of trouble getting that information, getting straight information from officials. So we did a survey of anyone who had been tested. We asked anybody who's been tested, let us know, where did you go? How long did it take? How long were you in line? Some of those sorts of things. So just to, again, to help inform the work that the journalists were doing. We wanted to further the reach of important coverage, including to community members who do not speak English as their first language. And this is where ABNC Bilingual became a huge, huge help to us. They helped us know what stories and information non-native English speakers needed at that time. They helped translate things, helped just constantly remind partners about that community that needed served by journalists as well. So we tried to, any story that we thought those people might need to read, we asked to have translated and shared that out to all the partners so they could use as well. This is a big one, but we wanted to help combat misinformation and promote media literacy. So a few of the things that we did is just trying to get straight information about so many of the things that people had questions about, whether that was testing or how to get services that you normally would be able to get. How do I go about doing that during the age of COVID? Help for small businesses. We tried to answer, as testing started, we tried to get as clear as information as possible and get that out to people. Vaccines, the same, when vaccines came about, trying to help people know answers to the questions that they had. This was kind of slipped in there. This was not really COVID related, but we did a social media campaign about misinformation, trying to give people tips for verifying information. So we ran that campaign. I think we had a series of like 20 tips, and we ran that campaign. I think I'd like to go back and run that campaign again because it was really good information, but I think our media partners were so busy at the time with what they were doing. I don't think they really ever shared this stuff enough. So I feel like the reach of that didn't probably meet what it could have. Again, the vaccine Q&A, and every time we ran something like that, we tried to run it in Spanish as well. It would have been great to run that in other languages. We just, we only did what we had the capacity to do at that point. One of the things we tried to do is listen to community members and know what they needed to know. Like, let them help tell us what they needed to know. So we would do that through social media posts, through surveys. This one had a link to surveys. This one was geared to parents. So this would have been in the fall as students started going back to school. Many of them were remote. Hey, tell us, what that looks like. Tell us what you need to know. We did a focus group. A couple of small focus groups actually with some parents to try to understand what it looked like for them, trying to have their kids learning remotely while they were maybe trying to work either from home or not from home. That helped inform some stories that were written, like this one about a Wichita homework hotline, letting people know that video tutoring was available. So, if you can't do your math with your kids like I can at home, what are some of the resources that you have? There were stories about, like the skating rink opened up for students to come be there during the day to do their online learning for parents who weren't going to be home. We did a story about grandparents who were, having their kids at their house, the grandkids at their house, to help them navigate online learning. We tried to do some panels, some online panels. This one was pretty successful, I thought. We had professionals, local counselors from schools and teachers come in and offer tips for parents who were, again, had their kids at home, learning from home. Wichita 259, I think, was remote for a year, weren't they? The whole year? Or just till December?
They came back
it all,
partially in the year in 2021.
Like some came back and some stayed home. Oh, we did that one already. This was just a little side, but the Sunflower helped cover the elections because we had elections, in November during all of that. So they helped cover the local elections. We sent some of our photographers went out and took photos and then shared those to all the collaboratives. Again, just trying to help, do whatever is possible to take some of that work off their plates. So in 2021 then, you're talking about 10 months, 11 months into the pandemic, the collaborative did decide to go back to their regular plan, their first initial plan, which was to cover mental health. And it took on a whole new meaning, right? We were talking about mental health coverage before the pandemic. Then the pandemic hits and suddenly everyone is talking about it more. Everybody maybe is affected by it more, or maybe they're just talking about it more, but lots of new questions concerning that emerged. So in the spring, early spring of 2020, we started trying to do stories and share stories on mental health. What resources are out there? What does this look like for people? That top story, this was a Wichita Eagle story. Here's where to find affordable therapy in Wichita. The collaborative then took that story and we turned it into what you have in front of you, I think, is that resources sheet. But it came from the reporting done from that Wichita Eagle story. So let people know where they can go to get help. The backside, we did it in Spanish as well. And then the backside of that, the library added, they pulled together from their collections books that they thought would be helpful and other resources. So we added that as well. And that's kind of how the library came into play. They just try to help us find good information to get out to people whenever possible. And finally, I'm about done rambling and we'll get to the panel. In July, we held an event. So events probably would have been part of our plan all along. But again, the pandemic happened, so that didn't really happen. But in July, we felt like we could safely have an event, a community event. And we brought in as many people as many resources as would come and like basically hold a table, like sometimes happens in the RSC downstairs. And we paired them up with our media partners, and we they were able to hand out their resources, talk to people. We handed out swag, which I have a few of on the front table here, like water bottles and a stress reliever shaped like a brain. So we had some fun things that people could come and pick up, but mostly it was about talking and learning and being open about mental health and trying to overcome the stigma. Here's some examples of some of our little giveaways. If you ask questions later, I'll toss you some of our swag. All right, the challenges probably are pretty obvious. The big one was the pandemic, that everyone was at home and we couldn't meet in person. Already strapped newsrooms who were working on that's huge story. And then we're asking them to add something to their plate. We're asking them to add meetings. We're asking them to try new things, which is pretty difficult to do, I would say, often in newsrooms, but especially when they're in the middle of covering a huge story. So that definitely was a challenge. So we have 4 people with us, and I will give a very brief introduction, but then I'm going to ask you all to talk just a little bit about your organization and a highlight from, I ask each of you to share one highlight from the past 18 months of working with the Wichita Journalism Collaborative. So we have Rachel Sommerfeld, the news director, do I have that right, at KSN. Michael Werman is the editor of the Wichita Eagle and Kansas.com. Lindsay Smith is the current editor of the Sunflower here, and Kylie Cameron was the editor-in-chief of the Sunflower when we started the collaborative, and now she's recently has moved to she's at KMUW, and she was at a TV station we won't mention right now for in between there. So let's start. I'll start with Rachel. Just a tiny bit about your organization and your role in the collaborative and a highlight for you.
Sure. So KSN, I think is one that not everyone always thinks about it from the journalism print side of view. I think everybody kind of feels like you have to be on TV to be involved with KSN or the NBC station here in town. I have been with KSN for about a little over 20 years, and I will tell you that never once have I appeared on television. In fact, I think the closest I got was when they needed a promo video, and they got video of my hands typing just to show what there was. That's the closest I've ever been to being on TV. So we are the NBC affiliate here in Wichita. We are also the Telemundo affiliate here. And so we have just in the last, really the last 18 months to 2 years, really started to build up our Telemundo and Spanish content as well. So we do a couple of cut-ins on our broadcast a couple days a week, but also try to keep TelemundoKansas.com filled with some of these details. And so that was a lot of where we were able to be helped out, certainly in the process of translating information there as well. As far as one of the highlights for me, it's honestly come most recently. In the last few months, maybe 4 or 5 months or so, we have worked very collaboratively with, for the most part, the Journal, Kansas Leadership Center, on a reporting with San Antonio, Texas, and here. So essentially, there is a campus-wide system that they have put together in San Antonio, Texas, called Haven for Hope. and it is meant to address mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness. So it's a 37-acre campus where it's kind of a one-stop shop for everyone to be involved and get many different resources. Wichita and Sedgwick County is considering doing something here, and they've gotten really pretty far along in their path to get there. And so through some of the money and the grant through the Solutions Journalism Network, one of our reporters was able to go down along with a freelance reporter, a print reporter, and spent several days checking out the location there, learning all about it, doing a ton of interviews, then came back here and talked to a lot of our local leaders. And so far we have done, I think, 6 or 7 stories, some through KSN, some through the Journal that we've worked collaboratively. It's amazing what a Google Doc will do for sharing information between the two, and have been able to put some of those things out. In fact, we just did a 30-minute special last Friday on some of the stories relating to that and what are kind of the next steps here. And we have a lot more to do. So I think there's no way that we would have thought about all of those kind of things had it not been for the Wichita Journalism Collaborative. And we're definitely looking forward to doing more with it.
Okay, I'm Michael Rorman. I'm the executive editor of Kansas.com and the Wichita Eagle. So yes, we are the stodgy old legacy newspaper. But like I like to tell people, only 20% of our readers actually read the print edition. We are primarily a digital company. 80% of all of our readership is just Kansas.com. I got to tell you, one of my highlights is actually not something we published, and it involves Rachel. When the collaborative first got together, there was a natural, or I shouldn't say natural, there was an expected wariness among all of these groups because we've always been in competition with each other. You know, who's going to get the news first, who's going to do the best version and all that. And so we really weren't sure how to communicate. And through this time we've spent together, those barriers have dropped. You know, there's still some there. You know, I still am really happy if I beat Rachel's folks to a story, and I'm sure the reverse is true. But there was a big ethical question of something recently that a city department did. And Rachel and I ended up spending half an hour on the phone talking out, well, what do you think we should do here? And what are you guys going to do? And going through, it was something that was very, very gray. And it was nice having somebody else leading a newsroom that I could bounce these questions and concerns off of and, you know, not work in that vacuum. And that was great. Another highlight was when the Sunflower staff came in on election night, and we were able to cover a whole lot more races because we had these student journalists in to help us provide that coverage. And that was wonderful. So.
Yeah, so I'm Lindsay Smith. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Sunflower. I'm a junior journalism student at Wichita State. And yeah, I guess the students definitely had a unique experience because you know, everyone else, you know, had been working in this field for a while. You know, it was professional organizations that have been covering the city for a long time. And as students, you know, of course, student journalists are still journalists, and I will say that till the day I die. But it was very unique because we got to really work hand in hand with professionals, and it was less of a they were teaching us and more of like we were on the same level, all learning from each other. And, you know, we wouldn't have gotten that if it weren't for the collaborative. And so that was super awesome just to sit in on these meetings and learn, you know, how these professionals, bounce ideas off of each other, you know, how they go about, you know, covering these certain stories. And of course, it was pretty hard to do that over Zoom. You know, I'm not going to say that it was the most amazing, beautiful, we were all intact with each other, we knew everything that was going on. It was definitely hard to do that, but, you know, it was really worth it. Even if I didn't talk as much in the meetings as other people, just to sit back and just kind of listen. And then, you know, having our first in-person meeting in July was super awesome to actually get to be in the room with those people. And yeah, like you said about election night, that was definitely probably my favorite highlight of actually getting, you know, student journalists byline, you know, in the Wichita Eagle and being able to work with editors through that. So that was super awesome. So, yeah.
I'm Kylie Cameron. I was the editor of the Sunflower when I guess this all sort of began. And then now I'm at KMUW, which is the public radio station here in town. I'm a news reporter there, and a lot of my coverage actually, you know, I'm trying to focus more on mental health and homelessness now. But I would say I think the highlight really of this was that I think it made everyone realize that we kind of need to branch outside of the communities that, you know, we were covering before and kind of expand into communities that we didn't really have as an audience before, especially when it came to, you know, non-native English speakers, stuff like that. So, you know, we branched out of the English-speaking white communities and expanded even more into communities that really needed the information, that weren't getting it. And, you know, the only way that they could get it was, you know, possibly from, you know, the Spanish TV stations, Radio Lobo, you know, stuff like that.
And what we have represented here for the most part, and I would exclude the Sunflower, we have KMUW, KSN, and the Eagle. Those were probably our largest partners. It's too bad we don't have some of our smaller, more niche publications. I will say it was more challenging to get them involved because they are so small. You know, many of them have newsrooms of 1 or possibly 1.5, or they rely on freelancers a lot. So can any of you talk a little bit about that relationship, about having the community voice, the A/B&C bilingual, the active age? What did that bring to the table for you all, and or what were the challenges in working with very different types of publications?
I would say it was actually one of the strengths of this. One of the things I thought was amazing about this group was we each had our own pretty specific audience, and there wasn't a lot of overlap. You know, there was some overlap between them, of course, but, you know, the community voice has its audience, Active Age has its, KSN has its, and we were all bringing something different when it came to readers or viewers or listeners. It also at times became one of the problems of the collaborative, to be frank, particularly when it came time for sharing stories. You know, sharing a KSN video report isn't really practical in a newspaper. On our website, a little bit more so. But I like that fact that we had that whole diversity of types. And so I think it was definitely more than anything else a strength. And you had mentioned ABC doing its translation service, and they did that with some of our bigger stories. We had a massive one on what are workers' rights if you or a coworker have COVID, you know, and you don't want to go back to work. And it was this huge Q&A that we then had translated into Spanish. But on top of that, AB&C has developed a social media following. And that's their primary publishing platform is through social media. And then they were able to take those stories and get them there because that audience was already following them. And that was a great strength, really was.
I would say another strength that we, you know, that we were able to gain from those other organizations was really outside of our collaborative reporting. So for example, again, AB&C Bilingual Resources, for us, as we were working to develop our Telemundo team and bring bilingual people on the staff, one of the things that I do with most entry-level candidates for open positions is I give them a writing test. I give them, you know, some specifics, and I want to see where they are, and that tells me real quick how they are on elements and as far as their journalism and journalistic skills. But I don't speak Spanish, and so that's not something that I can really determine. And so I was able to work with Claudia and say, hey, I've got some ideas, and how can we do this, and how can you basically give me an interpretation of how this this writing test in Spanish, whether that's going to be something good for us. And so that's something I've used multiple times since first learning about her organization that has helped us in our hiring and will help us for the long term in being able to reach non-native English speakers in our community, even far beyond what we have learned and been able to do through the collaborative.
I would say it's also strengthened our coverage as well when it comes to this is what specific communities are focusing on. You know, I remember with like the mental health talk, it was like, you know, how do these specific communities, how do these groups think about mental health, and do they even actually talk about that? You know, are there resources out there for them? And so it was nice, you know, to have that sort of representation and that diversity in our collaboration, because then it just really helped us move outside of into a bigger lens, really.
A couple other examples, I think they're good. You used up here what the Active Age did about the care homes and the COVID. That was very much their audience and what they cared about, but it hit the audiences of the rest of us as well, perhaps from a different angle. Maybe it's our readers, it's their parents who are in these care homes, but it was still of interest to them. And so we were able to get that news out there because they were covering it. Another one would be working with a journal, which is all freelancers. And one of the things that COVID revealed was just how big a problem broadband access in rural areas is. And he had a reporter working on that. And the way we collaborated was what we put in was a visual journalist. So we sent one of our photographers out to Western Kansas to document this. He sent out a words reporter, and then we just merged the two and then co-published for everybody. Excuse me.
I can think of several occasions where Claudia at ABC Bilingual, Benita Gooch at the Community Voice, and Joe at Active Age were able to bring sources that maybe KSN, the Eagle, the Sunflower, KMUW, maybe they were sources that they didn't know about, but because those news organizations are so connected to the communities that they serve, they were able to say, well, why don't you talk to so-and-so? And those were sources that never would have been talked to, about these stories, had we not had connections and had conversations where everyone was sitting at the same table. I will, if there is a good question, any question, I'm not going to say it's a bad question, I'm going to talk about it, but I'll open it up if there are questions that we want to get started with.
Okay, so this question is for Lindsay. So you started as a chief in the middle of the pandemic. How has that affected you and your, journey as editor? Do you feel as though the virus helped you to prepare because you got the opportunity to work hand in hand with people who had experience working in the field?
Yeah, so it was kind of sad in the sense to be editor-in-chief, to start it in the middle of the pandemic, because you lose out on so many things that I would have been able to do if it weren't for the pandemic. We couldn't travel to conferences, we couldn't get that hands-on experience outside of our newsroom, outside of our homes, because of the situation we were in. But being around professionals over Zoom did really help me, because that hands-on experience that I would have gotten going to conferences or being able to travel or do all these things, I missed out on that. And so to get that from somewhere else, even if it was over Zoom, was really helpful. And it was also just covering a pandemic. Obviously we've never done before. It's not something that a lot of people can check off their resume, and so to be able to almost have help from other people covering something that me as a student has never covered before, you as professional journalists probably have never covered before, did help with the coverage in that sense, because you had help from other people, you could get feedback from other people, you made all these professional connections just by being a part of the Sunflower, and not just me, everyone at the Sunflower, was able to have those connections and those opportunities to get their work published and get their work critiqued. And so, yeah, I think, it was definitely sad, and it wasn't ideal to start this position in the middle of a pandemic, but, nothing's ideal in the middle of a pandemic. Everything's better when there's not a pandemic involved. And so I think it was definitely it definitely helped the Sunflower and me as an individual to be a part of the collaborative during this. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Any other questions? And I'm going to try to repeat these so that people at home can hear.
Did you find this collaborative helpful with increasing your viewership across the board?
So did you find it helpful? I'm sorry, did you find it helpful with?
Increasing viewership.
Oh, increasing readership or viewership. Any statistics, any measurables?
I will say, as far as for us, I don't have the numbers with me, but we at one point had put together how many of our stories that were tagged on KSN.com, Wichita Journalism Collaborative stories, and how many page views that led to. And it was actually part of a report that I did for our corporate ownership to kind of show off some of the things that we were doing. And I don't want to guess the number because I don't really remember. Was it a massive, huge amount? No. Did it help? By all means, absolutely. And so for us, for example, as we've been able to see our increase in, broadcast ratings and also in the amount of unique visitors to KSN.com, page views, all of those kind of things. All of that has increased over the last 18 months. Can I say it was all directly related to the Wichita Journalism Collaborative versus, a worldwide pandemic that everyone all of a sudden cared about? Okay, probably there was a little bit of both there, but we definitely were able to increase some of our viewership that way.
Her answer works for me too. Sorry.
Any other questions?
How did you go about recruiting for this project and getting the amount of people that you were able to get? Like, what did that process look like of trying to join people together in the first place?
So before we were the collaborative,
Or I guess, how did you become the collaborative?
Yeah.
How did that joining process?
that was very much a part of the effort from the Wichita Community Foundation to start bringing people together. They made it one of their missions to strengthen the local news ecosystem. So they just started getting people in the same room, started these conversations. They were really paying attention to what was going on elsewhere in other communities, and they were bringing some of those ideas to us. They also sort of took, I don't remember if any of you went, I was one of a few people from the community who got to go to the Online News Association conference. It would have been the last one that was in person. And there we listened to some sessions by some other journalism collaboratives in other communities where we were able to learn and start brainstorming and talking and thinking. Tom Shine was one of the people who had gone. He's at KMUW now. So it really was there bringing people together to start the discussions that got us going. And they also, Courtney with the Community Foundation, had many discussions with the people at Solutions Journalism Network. And so she knew of the grant opportunities and pushed us, hey, if you guys want to do this, then here's a good grant opportunity. So kind of with that push is what got us going. And so we wrote the grant. Like I said, there were a lot more people interested, not a lot. I don't know, I would say 3 maybe who were really interested, who kind of trickled off and said, no, this isn't for us at this time. But the ones we were left with were people who said, yeah, let's get together and try something. Does that help at all? It was definitely purposeful on their end. The rest of it kind of was organic, I would say, as we decided who was actually going to participate and move forward.
Well, and one thing I'll add to that too is, I found out about this through an email that, to be real honest with you, I almost thought was spam and deleted and read through and went, oh, actually, this actually looks interesting, because I get so many emails a day, I get caught up in it. And so, went to an event that was held downtown, and Dr. Jarman provided us a survey that they had done about what was being done in the local journalism community. And they looked at all of our content, over the last several months. I don't remember how many months it was, and kind of took a look at, how much was in depth and how much was, part of a larger story, and how much was very single focused and single based as far as its kind of coverage. And, that was a little bit hard to sit here and be told, well, are you doing enough? Are all of you really serving our community the way we need to? But it started the conversation, and then I think just built so much from there that I think that was an essential part of getting us to actually see maybe some of our own faults as we could figure out how we could develop from there. And that was, I think, a lot of what guided us.
Any other responses from any of you? I will throw out a question. So we were grant funded, right? We had a $100,000 grant for a year. And oddly, we actually had a difficult time spending the money. I don't think that would have been the case had it not been the pandemic. Mm-hmm. But there were some restrictions on how we could spend the money. I think had we just said, hey, we have this money, we can spend it however we want, I don't think these people would have had any problem spending the money. But with the restrictions that we had and it being a pandemic, we did have trouble spending the $100,000 in the first year. We're also journalists, and I think by nature we're all frugal, right? We're used to not having a lot of extra money to spend. But so there was also a connection to the Wichita Community Foundation. And for some of the partners, I know there were, I don't even know what I want to say, ethical concerns we have some of our partners who are nonprofits. We have some who are corporate funded. So there's different business models across our partners. But anything that any of you would like to add about, were you skeptical at all about going into a situation where you're receiving a grant or you're working on something that's tied to a community organization?
Okay, I'll go. There's always going to be an ethical consideration when outside money comes in, because it can create that perception of, say, and to be clear up front, this did not happen. If the community foundation had done something that was questionable and we wanted to report on it, people could have a perception of that. Or if we wrote something that they were doing that was really awesome, would the perception be, well, you're only writing that because they're helping fund this? So that was the question going into this, is maintaining that independence and as much impartiality as is possible. But the perception of that is very important too. And once that's lost, you're in so much trouble. It's not even funny. So yeah, that was the concern going into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I reiterate what Michael said. There were no strings attached, and there was never a time when anyone from the Wichita Community Foundation, at least, came in and said, oh, well, you need to do this with that money, or this is how you need to operate, or this is what you need to cover. That didn't happen, which was nice, but that obviously was a concern that had to be addressed leading into this.
And to their credit, they acknowledged that at the beginning. So, that they were not going to have any editorial control over this. They were going to let us do our own thing. They were just helping facilitate this, which was great. It just becomes that outside awareness that the question comes into play.
Another question?
Let me clarify. It was moving from better to best. I guess I'm interested in the two parts of this are collaborative journalism and solutions journalism, and I get all of the value that collaborative journalism brings, and it sounds like that has continued and will continue. Could you all maybe talk about solutions journalism and how that part of this has played out and what you think that might lead to in the future? Because I love the idea that the news could help educate the public about solutions and not just the problems.
So Jeff's question for those at home is, we've talked a lot about collaborative journalism. The grant came from Solutions Journalism Network. So that was the lens we were, initially taking with mental health especially. So what did the partners find in working with in solutions journalism? And do we think there's a future in that type of reporting?
I would say KSN has actually done a really good job with the solutions journalism stuff. Sedgwick County, like you said previously, has been looking at sort of a model of the one-stop shop of where can people go for mental health resources and, other things that they need. And so, like previously said, they went down to San Antonio and they were like, this is how one specific county, this is how one specific city is addressing this problem. And then now Sedgwick County, is doing the same thing. They're also looking at San Antonio. And I would say it's a good benefit to show, we are kind of the whistleblowers, just telling people like, hey, this is going on. That's great, that we do that. But then it's also like, we should also show people how those problems can be addressed. But it also doesn't apply to every single story that you do. There are certain stories where you should do that.
I would definitely say it was a lot harder when we first started with the pandemic to have a solutions journalism angle, mainly because we had no idea what was going on. With the pandemic, when people didn't know what was going on, how we could fix this, I think it was definitely harder to take that angle and took a lot more work, especially since that was when we were first starting with the collaborative. But I think with the mental health topic, that was really, really awesome, honestly, to see, stories, about these problems people are facing, but also, here in Wichita, this is where you can get affordable mental health care. I think that was really helpful. And to even talk about our event, we had an event where people could go just to find mental health resources. And that's a solution, just, in general, just knowing where to find this help. So I think it was definitely hard to start writing solutions journalism right off the bat with the pandemic, with us also not knowing what's going on, us also trying to figure out what was going on. But I think there's definitely a future for solutions journalism because it is, a lot of times people, of course, it's really important to know what problems are going on, but people also want to know what solutions, what can we do about this? They don't always want to be sad all the time. So I think there's, of course, like you said, room for everything. There's room for some stories you can't have that angle, but then there are some stories that, we can definitely use that angle for.
I would say one of the solutions journalism is good when it's done right. And one of the key parts of that is not only showing what's working, but what hasn't worked. And getting that balance, because otherwise it can easily become advocacy journalism as opposed to, regular solid journalism. I think one of the tricks for us was learning it did not have to be the huge story. It could be smaller. So, for example, the ones we wrote was how working mothers were dealing with educating their kids, keeping their careers, and what the options were, and then also what the pitfalls were. And it was a smaller story. It was not a small story, but it wasn't, the giant 4,000 word or 2-part series. So learning that was valuable. But I think what's more valuable would be what KSN and the Journal recently did. That was probably the best example to come out of this.
Well, it was very challenging, definitely at the beginning. And I think, we weren't entirely sure what all was involved with solutions journalism. It's kind of, is there a problem? What's the solution? Well, it's not quite that simple as far as how you look at things. And so I think a very good point on the not falling into advocacy journalism is also a really important part, and is a fine line to kind of figure out where you're going when talking about these ups and downs. But I think one of the other things is being open to really, we should all be open to hearing what the real story is, but we all get our own biases. We all get our concept of where we think the story is going. And for us, for example, with the San Antonio project, we didn't know how much Sedgwick County had already done and how far along their path in this process they were. And so part of it was kind of coming back and going, oh, now I understand, what some of these other elements are that we need to tell these stories, many of which we haven't even gotten to yet, to make these things available to the public, because people really had no idea that some of these things, and still don't, are going on in our community. And so being able to kind of sort through, again, the positives, the negatives, the challenges, the things that haven't worked, I think is a part that we can do in regular stories every day, but you can dig into it a little bit more in a more solutions-based story.
I want to throw out, I'm reminded of looking at Dr. Tennett's, like what? Ian Tennett's class, it was your advanced reporting class, correct? They chipped in to the collaborative and tried to kind of learn about what the collaborative was doing. And they played, the role that I thought they played that was crucial is they really helped with a listening exercise that the collaborative did. When we were switching the topic to mental health, one of the suggestions from, I don't even remember what group, Harkin, I think it was, suggested, hey, go out and interview people, stakeholders, regular people, everyday people, not for the intent of quoting them in a story, but just to learn about the issues, to learn about mental health, to learn about what people are trying, to learn about what their struggles are. And his class took that on as an assignment and went out and did these interviews with people. And some of them led to really great story ideas that we wouldn't have thought of just sitting around a room, or in this case, Zoom, us discussing the story ideas, right? but them going out and talking to people who knew what was going on gave us these story ideas, and also really great people to talk to. And I'm thinking of one of the interviews that was with Dr. Provines here, Jessica Provines, who was on our Comm Week panel, our list lineup. She started talking about the Suspenders for Hope project and how it was going out into the community. And that became one of the Sunflower's early stories, I think, on mental health that was shared with everyone then. So,
And we did a broadcast version as well. So
right.
one where you can
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of,
yeah, yeah. That's right.
You could have both parts of it in a little different way.
Mm-hmm. So kudos to them for getting involved. And I think they wanted to be even more involved. It was a tough year. And again, had it not been pandemic, we probably would have, we would have met with that class in person and partnered them up probably with the different media organizations to do stories. Madeline looks like she might have a question.
Can you talk a little bit about why the story content is so scripted? It's like the pandemic, mental health, instead of just reacting to the news or having a more organic approach to the stories you've heard about. So will it always be scripted like that? You'll always have a topic that you're collaborating on?
I don't think there's an answer to that last question. Madeline is asking about, what the collaborative is working on at any given time. The suggestion, I'll just start and I'll throw it out to you, that the suggestion in the beginning from our funders was, hey, this is what other people have tried. And what we have found is that when you first get started as a collaborative, it's easier to learn how to work together if you have a narrow focus, somewhat narrow focus. Actually, they said, yes, the more narrow, the better. In fact, they said mental health is too broad. It was their suggestion to pick something very specific. And then it was the nature of the news and the pandemic that kind of caused that shift to, okay, now we're just going to kind of help each other out as best we can with the pandemic. And then that dived back into mental health after. Does anyone have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so I was saying you're making the bunny motion, and that really was because that's the grant was predicated on that coverage. So that is where we kept it. And when we started with mental health, what that was, we had all these conversations about what can we tackle that each of the partners can bring something to. And when we get back to the idea of the diversity of the types of news organizations, what is something that each of us could take a piece of? And so that's what led to that. As for the future, yes, all the partners have already said they do want it to continue. What form, now that we are finished with the grant funded period, what form that takes, we have not figured out yet. We're all really busy, so trying to find a time for all of us to get together is very tricky. Yes.
I would say also when it came to the subjects, there were a couple that were kind of pitched to us just from studies that were kind of done and interviews that were made and everything. And we tried to focus more on what actually impacts our entire community. And there were a couple of topics that we were like, we're not exactly sure if it does, we're not exactly sure if it doesn't. But, mental health is something that affects us all. And, we all had shared stories just about, how it does affect us. And I think that's how we ultimately came to that conclusion. And then the pandemic happened, obviously. But it was really more about, just making sure we can all cover the entire community and make sure we are each reaching our audiences.
So I think we are just about out of time. And I want every person up on this panel to take 60 seconds and tell the students in the audience what kinds of experiences you have. How can you hire them? Do you have internships? How can they get more experience? And what does your organization have to offer them? So let's start with Kylie this time at KMUW.
Actually, we have a ton. And I think all of our open positions right now are actually internships. We're always hiring for our newsroom, for interns. I think we try to do like 2 a semester, I think, like 1 to 2 people just for the newsroom. We also have, for anyone who's not a journalism major, we also have like marketing and engagement internships. So that's for like the IMC type majors, Stratcom. Really anyone like in the Elliott School can probably get an internship at KMUW. But we also have this really cool one called the Corbett Coleman internship. And so that one's actually a summer internship. It's all of these are paid, by the way, but this one's also paid for room and board, as well as just the general work that you do. But you actually get to work with Corva Coleman, who is an NPR reporter, and she's amazing. She's really good. But it's targeted more specifically for students of color, which is really cool, and I think really important to get more just diverse people into public radio. But we have a ton of internships. I would say they're very important. I was an intern at KMUW 2 years ago. And then when I started looking for jobs, recently in the past couple of months, the editor who I worked with during that time found out. And that's how I got my job now. So internships, I would say, are very, very important. And if you're ever interested, go look at KMUW, and as well as everybody else.
Lindsay in the Sunflower.
Yeah, so if you're a student at Wichita State, you can apply to work at the Sunflower. So yeah, we're obviously the student newspaper of Wichita State. If you want to start applying, we hire reporters, photographers, videographers, literally anyone who wants to produce content for us is welcome to apply. You don't have to have an amazing resume to apply. I had nothing when I applied. You hired me. I didn't have any work samples or anything when I applied in yet, but we're looking for people who want to learn and who are interested. If you want to go into journalism and if you want to report on news, we're always looking for people. If you are more of like writing opinion columns, we're always looking for columnists. And you do not have to be a journalism major to apply. We have people from all across the university, all different majors. So don't worry if you're not a journalism major, not a communications major. So yeah, I definitely recommend when you first start out, it is paid, which is super awesome. I know a lot of student newspapers don't pay their workers, but we do. It starts with freelance. And so if you apply to be a reporter, photographer, it's all freelance, which is really nice because I know when I first started the Sunflower, I started when I was a freshman, and it was scary to, start college and start a new job at the same time. But it was really flexible because if there was ever a week that I couldn't do a lot of work because I was stressed with exams or whatever, then, I could just tell the editor-in-chief and I could, just do what I could do. And then you do get paid for the work that you do. So it's really awesome. I definitely recommend www.thesunflower.com, little work with us tab. Send me your application. It's super simple. So yeah, please apply.
Michael.
After going 2 years without, we will have internships again this next summer. We are going to have 3 fully paid internships. One of those is going to be focused on minority communities. The other 2 will be general assignment reporters. And the main thing I tell people is at least 3 of our reporters, including 2 of the last 3 I've hired, were former interns at the Eagle. So it's usually a very, very good opportunity. Matthew Kelly, Chance Swain, and then way before any of your time, Amy Renee Liker started out as an intern at the Eagle as well. So yes, apply at mcclatchy.com/careers.
Rachel.
KSN has a lot of opportunities. And just to make it clear, not all of them, in fact, most of them don't have anything to do with being in front of a camera. You have multiple opportunities. If you want to be the reporter on camera and eventually work your way to an anchor, come talk to me. We certainly have those opportunities, but we have a whole lot of things behind the scenes as well. That would include producing positions. And I will tell you that I was a producer for, I think about 9 years before I went into the management side of things at KSN. And I will tell you that the very first day I came from newspaper, I came from a newspaper background at my college and through a couple of other spaces. The very first day I walked into KSN and I walk into the first editorial meeting and I hear everybody talking about the VOSOTs and the full screens and the TRT and the CG times and all those things. I was terrified. I didn't know what any of those things meant, and I thought I had made a huge mistake to leave the newspaper job I had and come to TV. Turned it into really loving it and really figuring it out really pretty quickly. If you know journalism, you know how to be a good writer. There are opportunities for you. So producing is a huge one. Some on-camera elements we have as well. We are opening up things to be a little more entry level as far as if you are towards the end of your collegiate career, we would consider that. We'll also consider some part-time waiting till full-time when you would graduate or be able to put that into your schedule. We also have opportunities on the digital front. In fact, we've hired a current WSU student to be a full-time digital reporter as well, who's working behind the scenes. So there's multiple different options there. Also on the Telemundo side, any bilingual Spanish, English speakers, we have great opportunities there. So come see me afterwards. I would love to give each of you my card, and then just give me a call, give me an email, and I'd love to tell you more about it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm sure that you can reach out to any of those people. Their emails are probably pretty easy to find, or talk to me. I'm happy to connect you with any of them as well. So thank you so much. I believe we have lunch right out the door, so help yourself to lunch. And our next panel, 12:30. Students talking about internships that they're currently in.